They told us to prepare for extinction, not retreat, not surrender. Extinction, because what was coming was not an army. It was a storm, a living, descending storm that blotted out the stars themselves. We watched the sky burn for 3 straight hours, not with fire, but with movement. Thousands of shapes tearing through the upper atmosphere, falling faster than anything we had ever recorded, faster than anything we could stop. Our orbital defenses had already failed. Our fleets were gone. And on the surface, we were all that remained. The last line, the last mistake, the last thing standing between the Harvok swarm and total planetary consumption. We had no reinforcements, no escape, no plan, only a countdown. 32 minutes until atmospheric breach, 29 minutes until impact, 27 minutes until annihilation. I remember looking around the command trench at warriors from a dozen different species, each one stronger than a human, each one bred for war, each one afraid, because we had seen what the swarm did to planets. There were no survivors, no prisoners, no bodies, just silence and ash. So we did what soldiers do when the end becomes inevitable. We prepared to die standing, weapons primed, defenses locked, final messages recorded. No one spoke of victory, only of how long we could delay the inevitable. 5 minutes, 10. If we were lucky, that's when someone laughed. Not loudly, not heroically, just quietly, almost like they had heard a joke no one else understood. At first, no one paid attention. Why would we? The trench was filled with elite commanders, and at the very back, buried behind supply crates and broken equipment, was a human, not a soldier, not even close. A logistics officer, Elias Varn, the one they sent to count ammunition while the rest of us prepared for war. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to matter. And yet, he was the only one not looking at the sky with fear. He was watching it, like it was a problem waiting to be solved. I remember one of the Cathari war chiefs snarling at him. What is amusing, human? No answer. Just silence. Then finally, Elias looked up, not at the commanders, not at the battlefield, but at the sky itself, and he said something so quiet, so completely absurd, that none of us understood it at the time. They're coming in too clean, too clean. We didn't know it then. But those 4 words were the reason we survived. Because while we were preparing to die, Elias Varn was preparing the sky. Perfect. Now we start deepening the character, the humiliation, and the hopelessness. This part builds emotional weight and sets up the intelligence gap. No one took him seriously after that. Not the commanders, not the soldiers, not even his own kind. Because in a war like this, observation meant nothing. Only strength mattered. Only firepower. Only survival. And Elias Varn had none of those. He didn't wear combat armor, didn't carry a heavy rifle, didn't lead troops. He didn't even have a combat designation. His file labeled him as something far more insulting on a battlefield like ours. Logistics and resource allocation. A glorified quartermaster. A counter of supplies. A keeper of inventory. While warriors bled in the trenches, Elias counted what remained of their ammunition. While commanders planned defensive formations, Elias tracked how quickly those formations would run out of power. And while the rest of us trained for combat, Elias trained in something no one respected anymore. Patterns, numbers, and systems. I remember the first time I saw him get laughed out of a war briefing. It was 3 days before the final assault warning. The command chamber was filled with representatives from every surviving division. Cathari war chiefs, Vorlian tacticians, human marines, all arguing over one thing: how to die slower, because that was the only strategy left. Delay, endure, collapse later, rather than sooner. Elias stood in the back of that room, quiet, uninvited, watching, listening, until Somehow, he found the courage to speak. Their entry formations. That was as far as he got. A Vorlian commander cut him off immediately. Not now, human. Another voice joined in. Let the soldiers speak. A third didn't even look at him. This is not a supply concern. The room moved on without him. Like he wasn't there. Like he never existed. And Elias just nodded, stepped back, disappeared into silence. That was the moment I understood how the others saw him. Not as weak, not as useless, but as irrelevant, which, in war, is far worse. Later that same day, orders came down from command, not for reinforcements, not for evacuation, but for reassignment. Every unit was to prepare for final defensive positions. Every officer was given a role in the last stand. Every soldier, except one. Elias Varn was reassigned to orbital debris control. At first, I thought it was a mistake, because there was no orbital control anymore. The defense grid had been shattered weeks ago. Satellite arrays destroyed. Weapon platforms reduced to drifting wreckage. The sky above us was nothing but broken metal and dead systems. But the order stood. Maintain debris tracking and hazard mapping. A task so meaningless, it was almost cruel. They hadn't given him a role in the battle. They had given him a distraction, something to keep him busy, while the rest of us prepared to die. I found him a few hours later, alone, sitting in a half-collapsed control station buried beneath layers of dust and damaged wiring. Old screens flickered around him, most of them broken, some barely functioning, displaying fragments of the sky above. Orbital fragments. Thermal signature. Falling wreckage. It was a graveyard, not a battlefield. And yet, Elias stared at those screens, like they mattered more than anything else. You know, that's pointless, right? I don't even know why I said it. Maybe I felt sorry for him. Maybe I wanted to understand. He didn't look at me, didn't react, just kept watching the data scroll. They gave you a job no one else wanted, I continued. No, he said quietly. They gave me the only one that matters. That got my attention. I stepped closer. What do you mean? For a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he reached forward, tapped a cracked display panel, zoomed in on something I couldn't understand. Lines, angles, vectors, movement paths. Everyone's watching the ground, he said. They're preparing for impact. Another tap. The screen shifted, showing descending clusters, burning trails cutting through the atmosphere. But the battle isn't going to start down here. He finally turned to look at me, and there was something different in his eyes now. Not fear, not panic, but focus. Sharp, unshaken. It's going to start up there. I frowned. That's where it always starts. He shook his head. No, he said. That's where it always ends. Silence filled the room, broken only by the faint crackle of failing systems. You said earlier. I hesitated. Too clean. What does that mean? Elias leaned back slightly, as if weighing whether it was even worth explaining. Then he exhaled slowly. It means they're predictable. That word alone was dangerous, because nothing about the Harvok swarm was supposed to be predictable. They adapt, I said, faster than we can respond. Yes. Elias nodded. But adaptation doesn't mean randomness. He pointed back at the screen. At scale, even chaos forms patterns. I stared at the data, still not seeing what he saw. They're using optimal entry corridors, he continued. Minimal atmospheric resistance, maximum velocity, perfect spacing to avoid collision. I crossed my arms. That sounds like efficiency. It is. He leaned forward again. And that's the problem. I didn't understand. Not yet. But something in his voice. Let me listen. Perfect systems, Elias said quietly, have perfect weaknesses. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Uncomfortable. Because they sounded like hope. And hope was something we had already buried. Outside, the sky rumbled. A distant shock wave rolled across the horizon. Another wave entering orbit. Closer, now. Louder. Deadlier. I looked back at the screens. At the falling storm. Then back at him. You really think this matters? I asked. Elias didn't hesitate this time. Yes, no doubt, no fear, just certainty. And, for the first time since the war began, I realized something that should have been impossible. The only person on this planet who still believed we could win was the one no one had bothered to listen to. The sky kept getting brighter, not with light, but with friction. Every few seconds, another streak tore across the upper atmosphere. White hot, violent, unstoppable. The Harvok were getting closer. And down in the trenches, panic was starting to bleed through discipline. Orders were repeated louder. Defensive lines were reinforced again and again, as if stacking more metal would somehow stop a falling apocalypse. But in that broken control station, far from the noise of soldiers preparing to die, Elias Varn was doing something no one else even considered. He was studying the invasion, not reacting to it, not fearing it, studying it, frame by frame, wave by wave, like it was a puzzle. And somehow, that was more terrifying than the enemy itself. I stayed. I don't know why. Maybe because there was nothing left to lose. Maybe because part of me wanted to believe that he wasn't just another man hiding from reality. The screens flickered again. One of them nearly died before stabilizing. Elias adjusted something manually, rerouting power from systems that no longer mattered, prioritizing this. Whatever this was. You said they're predictable, I reminded him. Yes, and that's supposed to help us how? He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he brought up multiple overlays across the screens. Trajectory lines, entry angles, density clusters. At first, it looked like chaos. Too much movement, too much data. But then, he filtered it, simplified it, stripped it down to its structure. And suddenly, I saw it. Not clearly, not completely, but enough to feel it. Patterns, repeating corridors, identical approach vectors, like invisible highways carved into the sky. They're not just entering the atmosphere, Elias said. They're following lanes. Lanes? I echoed. He nodded. Paths of least resistance. He highlighted one of them. A narrow corridor where multiple units had passed within seconds of each other. Then another, and another, all converging toward the same planetary regions. They've mapped the atmosphere better than we have, he continued. They know exactly where drag is lowest, where turbulence is weakest, where descent is fastest. That's why we can't intercept them, I said slowly. We're reacting after they've already committed. Exactly. He looked at me again, and now there was something else in his expression. Not just focus, not just certainty, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Pilan. They're optimizing for speed and efficiency, he said. They've eliminated variables. That's what makes them unstoppable. Elias shook his head. No, that's what makes them fragile. I felt a chill run through me. Fragile? I repeated. These things survive orbital fire. They survive atmospheric burn. They survive direct impact. And you're calling them fragile? I'm calling their system fragile. He zoomed in again. This time, not on the enemy, but on the space between them. Distance, timing, spacing, precision. They rely on perfect separation, he said. Perfect timing, perfect alignment. Because at those speeds, he paused. Let the implications settle. Even a small disruption becomes catastrophic. The room went quiet, completely still, because now I understood. Not fully, but enough. You're saying, I began carefully, if something interferes with those lanes, they collide. Elias finished. Or worse, another tap, another screen came alive, displaying something I hadn't noticed before. Orbital debris, thousands of fragments, remnants of destroyed ships, weapon platforms, satellite floating in decaying orbits above us. A graveyard, but not a silent one. They were moving, slowly, unpredictably, decaying paths, shifting with gravitational fluctuations. I stared at it, then back at him. No, I said immediately. That's not controlled. That's random. Elias gave a slight smile. Not random enough. My stomach tightened. You can't be serious. He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. You're talking about using debris, I continued, to intercept a descending swarm moving at terminal velocity. That's not a defense. That's suicide. It's physics, he corrected calmly. Physics we've been ignoring. I ran a hand through my hair, trying to process it, trying to find the flaw. Because there had to be one. There's no way to control it, I argued. No precision, no timing, no guarantee. Correct. He nodded. Unless we change the variables. That's when it hit me. Not all at once, but piece by piece, like something falling into place. You want to move the debris? Yes. With what? I snapped. We barely have power for ground defenses. The orbital grid is dead. The satellites are destroyed. We have nothing left. Elias leaned forward, and for the first time, he looked almost amused. Not nothing, he said. He brought up a hidden system overlay, one I hadn't seen before. Old, ancien, barely functioning, but still alive. Emergency positioning thrusters, he explained. Installed on every major orbital structure, for stabilization, for collision avoidance, for things like this. My eyes widened. They still work? Some of them, he said. Enough. I stared at the screen, at the drifting graveyard above us. And suddenly, it didn't look so random anymore. It looked like a field, a weapon, unstable, unpredictable, but if guided, devastating. You're not just trying to hit them, I realized. You're trying to force them into it. Elias didn't respond, but he didn't need to, because now I could see the outline of the plan. Not complete, not safe, but real, terrifyingly real. They won't expect it, he said quietly. They can't, because no one would ever choose to fight like this. I swallowed hard. No one except someone who has no other choice. Elias Metmegaze. And this time, there was no doubt left. No, he said. Someone who realizes. He gestured toward the sky, toward the burning descent, toward the incoming storm. This was never their advantage. Another streak tore across the atmosphere. Closer now, louder. The countdown continued. But something had changed. Not outside, not yet, but inside that room, inside that moment. Hope had returned, not as a feeling, not as belief, but as a strategy. And for the first time since the war began, we weren't preparing to die anymore. We were preparing to interfere. The first thing Elias did was not ask for permission, because permission would have killed the idea before it even had a chance to breathe. Instead, he did something far more dangerous. He acted quietly, carefully, and completely outside the chain of command. The control station lights dimmed as he rerouted power again. Non-essential systems went dark one by one. Environmental stabilizers, secondary comms, even parts of the defensive grid that were already failing. All of it sacrificed. For one purpose, the sky. You're going to get noticed, I warned. They're all a little busy preparing for extinction, Elias replied. They won't notice. Not yet. Not yet. Those two words carried more weight than anything else he had said so far, because time was the one thing we didn't have. He began accessing the orbital network, if you could still call it that. Fragments of code, broken relays, dead satellites barely responding to handshake signals. It wasn't a system anymore. It was a corpse, and Elias was trying to make it move. Come on, he muttered under his breath. Just one response. For a moment, nothing happened. The screens flickered. Static crawled across the displays. Error messages stacked over each other. Then, a signal. Weak, faint, but real. One satellite pinged back. Designation: Odd 17 stabilization node. Status: critical. Functionality: 12%. Thruster control: limited. Elias didn't celebrate, didn't smile. He just leaned forward and got to work. Routing control, he whispered. Manual override. The system resisted. Of course it did. Security protocols were never designed to be used like this. But those protocols had one flaw. They assumed the network was intact. It wasn't. And Elias knew exactly how to exploit that. Line by line, he rewrote access pathways, bypassed authorization layers, forced the system to accept commands it was never meant to receive. It wasn't hacking. Not exactly. It was persuasion, convincing a dying machine that it still had a purpose. Got you, he said finally. The satellite shifted. Barely. Almost invisible. But it moved. And that changed everything. I stared at the screen. You just moved orbital debris. Yes. With a broken satellite. Yes. While the planet is under invasion. He glanced at me. Would you prefer I wait until it's over? I didn't answer. Because for the first time, this didn't feel impossible anymore. It felt insane, which was somehow better. More signals came in, one after another. Not many, but enough. Od 23. Od 47. Fragments of the old defense grid. All damaged, all weak, but still capable of one thing. Movement. Elias mapped them quickly, plotting their positions, calculating drift, estimating how long each thruster could function before burning out completely. They don't need to last, he said. They just need to move once. Once. One push. One shift. At the right time. In the right place. I felt my pulse quicken. You're building a field, I said. He nodded. A collision field, but not random. His fingers moved faster now. Adjusting vectors. Aligning fragments. Creating something invisible to anyone not looking for it. A trap. In the sky. And then, the door slammed open. The sound echoed through the station, like a gunshot. We both turned. A Kethari war chief stood in the doorway, towering, armored, eyes burning with irritation. I was told power was being diverted, he growled. Elias didn't stand, didn't salute, didn't even turn fully toward him. Correct, he said calmly. The war chief stepped forward, heavy footsteps shaking the floor. For what purpose? Silence. For just a second. And I knew this was the moment where everything either ended or began. Elias finally turned his chair, met the war chief's gaze directly. I'm preparing orbital interference. The war chief's expression didn't change, but the air in the room did. Colder, tighter. Explain, he demanded. Elias gestured to the screens, to the drifting debris, to the incoming descent paths. They're using optimized entry lanes, he said. I can disrupt those lanes. With debris? The war chief scoffed. That debris cannot even maintain orbit. It doesn't need to, Elias replied. It only needs to intersect. The war chief stepped closer, towering over him now. And you believe this will stop them? No, Elias said. A pause. Then, I believe it will break them. The room went completely still, because that word was not something anyone used against the Karvik swarm. Break. They did not break. They consumed. They adapted. They won. Always. The war chief leaned down slightly, studying him, as if trying to decide whether this was courage or insanity. You are diverting power from ground defenses, he said slowly. For a theory. For a certainty. Elias corrected. Another dangerous word. Another risk. The war chief's grip tightened on his weapon. Every unit is preparing for impact, he said. And you are playing with scrap metal in the sky? Elias didn't flinch. Every unit is preparing to lose. That hit harder than any weapon. Even I felt it. The truth of it. Raw. Unfiltered. Unavoidable. The war chief straightened. Silence stretched between them. Long. Heavy. Decisive. Finally, he spoke. If you are wrong. His voice dropped. Low. Deadly. You will have weakened our final defense for nothing. Elias nodded. Yes. And if you are right? For the first time, There was the faintest shift in Elias's expression. Not fear, not doubt, but something close to conviction. Then they won't reach the ground the way they expect. Another distant shockwave rolled across the planet. Closer now. The sky above flickered with burning trails. Time was running out. The war chief turned toward the door, paused. Then, without looking back, you have until atmospheric breach. A step forward. If I see our defenses fail because of this, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The door slammed shut behind him. And just like that, Elias Varn had been given the most dangerous permission of all. None at all. I looked at him. You just bet the entire planet on this. He didn't respond immediately. His eyes were already back on the screens, on the moving debris, on the falling storm. I didn't bet anything, he said quietly. I calculated it. Another satellite shifted. Then another. The field was forming now. Slowly, delicately, piece by piece. Above us, the sky was no longer just a battlefield. It was becoming something else. Something the enemy had never seen before. Something they would never expect. A weapon, built from the ruins of defeat. Time was no longer moving forward. It was collapsing. Every second felt shorter than the last. Every sound sharper. Every impact closer. The sky above us was no longer distant. It was alive. Burning trails carved across the atmosphere in thick clusters now. Not scattered. Not probing. This was the main descent. The real assault. And still, Elias Varn kept moving pieces in the sky, like it was only the beginning. Faster, he muttered. Come on, drift, drift. The orbital debris field was shifting now. Slowly, painfully, slowly. Fragments rotating, paths adjusting, invisible lines forming across the upper atmosphere. To anyone else, it still looked like chaos, but I could see it now. The shape of it, the intent. On it, a massive, unstable net stretched across the entry lanes. But even as it formed, I could feel the doubt creeping in again. It wasn't enough. Not against something like the Karvok swarm. They'll lose some units, I said. Maybe even a lot, but not enough to stop the main force. Elias didn't respond, which told me everything. Because if he had agreed, this would already be over. Instead, he zoomed out, way out, past the debris field, past the upper atmosphere, into the edge of orbit itself, where something else was waiting. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Just faint signals, holding positions beyond the visible debris. Not moving, not engaging, just there. What is that? I asked. Elias exhaled slowly, as if this was the part he had been building toward all along. The second layer. A cold weight settled in my chest. Second layer? He nodded. The debris isn't the weapon. That sentence alone rewrote everything I thought I understood. It's the trigger. I stared at him, trying to catch up, trying to understand what could possibly be more dangerous than turning orbit itself into a collision field. What comes after the trigger? I asked. Elias tapped the screen. The faint signals sharpened, resolved into identifiable markers. Dropods. Hundreds of them, holding position just outside the main orbital decay zone. Hidden. Silent. Waiting. My breath caught. No, I whispered. Elias didn't look at me this time, because he already knew. He already knew exactly what I was thinking. You didn't, I said. You couldn't have. I did. The words landed like impact shock. You called in reinforcements? No. He shook his head. I called in a timing correction. That didn't make it better. If anything, it made it worse. Those are human pods, I said. Unarmed insertion units. They're not designed for combat drops at that velocity. I know. They'll burn up. Some of them will. They'll miss their targets. Yes. They'll die before they even hit the ground. Another quiet answer. Yes. Silence filled the room again. But this time, it wasn't confusion. It was realization. Slow, horrifying, and absolute. You're not dropping them behind enemy lines, I said carefully. You're dropping them through the enemy. Elias finally looked at me, and in his eyes, there was no hesitation left. No, he said, I'm dropping them with the enemy. The full weight of it hit me then. Not a defense, not a delay, not even a counterattack. This was something else, entirely. You're forcing them into the same lanes, I said. Yes. At the same time, yes. With disrupted spacing, yes. My voice dropped, almost a whisper. That's not a battle. Elias leaned forward slightly. It's a collapse. Outside, the sky roared again. Closer now. Louder. The first shockwaves of atmospheric entry were starting to reach the surface. The countdown was nearly over. They rely on separation, Elias continued. Precision, clean descent paths. He gestured toward the debris field. First, we break that. Then toward the pods. Then we flood the lanes. With chaos, with mass, with interference they can't adapt to in time. I felt my pulse hammering in my ears. They won't be able to maneuver, I said. They won't be able to react. They'll hit each other, Elias confirmed. And your soldiers? He didn't answer immediately. And that silence was the hardest part of all. Some will make it through, he said finally. Enough. Enough. That word again. Cold. Calculated. Ruthless. Not because he didn't care, but because he understood the cost. You're asking them to fall into a storm, I said. I'm asking them to fall with control into a storm that no longer belongs to the enemy. He turned back to the console, opened a comm channel. Encrypted. Direct. This is Varn, he said. Confirm readiness. For a moment, nothing. Then, static. A voice. Calm. Steady. Human. Drop command here. We've been holding position for 12 minutes. Starting to think you forgot about us. Elias's expression didn't change. Adjusting vector windows now, he said. You'll have one pass. A pause on the other end. Then a short exhale. That bad, huh? Yes. Another pause. Longer this time. Heard you needed chaos, the voice said. Elias glanced briefly at the falling sky. I need precision chaos. A quiet chuckle came through the comm. Yeah, that sounds like us. My chest tightened. Because suddenly, this wasn't theory anymore. It wasn't numbers. It wasn't patterns. It was people. Real soldiers. About to be thrown into something no one had ever attempted before. You understand the risk, Elias said. Fully, the voice replied. No guarantee of survival. Wasn't expecting one. A beat. Then, just tell us where to fall. Elias closed his eyes for half a second. Not hesitation. Not doubt. Calculation. Final alignment. Then he opened them again. Sharp. Focused. Ready. I'll guide you, he said. Outside, the sky began to split open. The first wave of the Harvok swarm breached the upper atmosphere. Fire. Friction. Sound tearing itself apart. And high above them, hidden in the dark edge of orbit, human soldiers waited. Not for safety, not for orders, but for a signal. The moment where gravity itself would become a weapon. I looked at Elias, at the man no one had trusted, no one had listened to, no one had believed in. And now, everything depended on him. You really think this will work? I asked quietly. He didn't look away from the sky. They prepared for a clean invasion, he said. A pause. Then, we're about to make it messy. The sky broke. There is no other way to describe it. It didn't darken. It didn't burn. It fractured. Like reality itself couldn't handle what was forcing its way through the atmosphere. The first wave of the Harvok swarm hit the upper layers like a meteor storm. Except, meteors don't think. Meteors don't correct their trajectory mid-descent. Meteors don't arrive in perfect formation. This was controlled annihilation. Thousands of biomechanical constructs tearing through the sky in synchronized descent lanes. Each one glowing white-hot. Each one perfectly spaced. Each one unstoppable. The air itself screamed as they fell. Shockwaves rolled across the surface in violent pulses. Mountains trembled. Defense lines flickered under the pressure. And still, they came. Closer. Faster. Larger. Every second. "They've committed," I whispered. Elias didn't respond. His eyes were locked onto the screens, tracking, calculating, waiting. Because this was the moment. Everything balanced on. Too early, and the debris field wouldn't align. Too late, and the swarm would already be through. "Hold," he murmured. The countdown hit 0. Atmospheric breach. The first units crossed into lower descent, their outer shells shedding heat like falling stars. Formation intact. Unbroken. Unchallenged. Exactly as they expected. "Now," Elias said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to, because in that single word, an entire battlefield changed. High above, thrusters ignited. Not from ships, not from weapons, but from the dead. The orbital graveyard came alive. Fragments that had drifted for weeks suddenly shifted, rotating, accelerating, sliding into new vectors. Invisible forces pushing them into paths they were never meant to take. The sky moved. At first, it was subtle, almost unnoticeable. A fragment crossing slightly closer than expected. A shift in alignment. A narrowing of space. Then, the first collision. It wasn't loud. Not down here. But we saw it. A flash. A sudden break in formation. One Karvok unit clipped by a drifting shard of metal. At that speed, that was enough. It spun, deviated, slammed into the unit beside it. And just like that, perfection shattered. "They're adjusting," I said quickly. "They'll compensate." Elias didn't look away. "They'll try." More debris shifted. More paths crossed. The lanes narrowed. What had been clean corridors were now crowded, unstably, dangerous. Another collision, then another, then a chain reaction. Units striking each other mid-descent, breaking formation, spinning out of control. Some burning apart before they could correct. Others slamming into new vectors, straight into incoming waves. The sky lit up, not with controlled descent anymore, but with chaos. "They're losing spacing," I shouted. "They're collapsing their own lanes." Elias's voice stayed calm, not fast enough. And he was right. Even breaking, even colliding, there were still too many. The main mass was still coming through, still descending, still unstoppable. The debris field was working, but it wasn't enough. Not yet. Elias reached for the comm. "This is Varn," he said. "Window is open." A beat of static. "Then, copy that," the voice replied. "Dropping in." I felt it before I saw it. A shift, a presence, something new entering the battlefield. High above the burning chaos, tiny points of light appeared. Dozens. Then hundreds. Then hundreds more. Not falling randomly. Not drifting, but aiming. My breath caught. "No way." I whispered. Elias didn't speak. Because this was the moment. The moment everything either became legend or disaster. The human drop pods ignited, controlled descent thrusters flaring against the upper atmosphere. And then they dove straight into the storm. Not around it, not behind it, through it. "They're insane," I shouted. "They're dead." Elias's voice cut through the chaos. "No," he said. "They're early." The pods accelerated, faster than standard drop protocol, faster than safe limits, cutting directly into the disrupted lanes, into debris, into enemy formations, already struggling to stabilize. And suddenly, the sky wasn't just chaos anymore. It was collision, pods slicing through unstable descent paths, Harvok units trying to correct and failing, because now there was too much, too many variables, too many impacts, too much interference. They can't track all of it, I realized. They can't predict the paths. "That's the point," Elias said. The first pod hit, not the ground. An enemy unit. Direct impact. Both vanished in a burst of fire and fragmentation. Then another, and another. Pods colliding with debris. Debris striking swarm units. Swarm units smashing into each other. It was no longer a descent. It was a collapse. The entire invasion wave began to buckle inward. Spacing gone. Alignment gone. Control gone. "They're losing formation," I shouted. "They're losing everything." Elias leaned forward, eyes locked, watching it all unfold exactly as he had calculated. "Wait," he said quietly, "for it." The second wave of pods entered, then the third, each one adding mass, adding chaos, adding disruption. The sky became a storm of fire and metal, explosions chaining across the upper atmosphere, shockwaves colliding, fragments scattering in every direction. The Karvok tried to adapt, tried to reroute, but there was nowhere left to go. Their perfect system had become a trap, and they had no time to escape it. "This isn't a defense," I breathed. Elias's voice was steady. "No." Below us, pieces of the swarm began falling, not in formation, not controlled, burning, broken, destroyed before they ever reached the ground. Above us, human soldiers were still falling, through fire, through debris, through the impossible, and for the first time since the war began, the sky didn't belong to the enemy anymore. It belonged to those who were willing to fall through it. The sky didn't stop burning. It got worse. What had once been a controlled descent had become a collapsing storm of fire, metal, and bodies. And then, the first one hit the ground. Not an enemy, a human. The drop pod slammed into the fractured earth just beyond the forward trench line. The impact shook everything. Dirt and debris blasted outward in a violent shockwave. For a split second, there was silence. Then the pod cracked open, and a human soldier stepped out, armor scorched black, visor glowing faintly through the smoke, weapon already raised. No hesitation, no confusion, just immediate, controlled aggression. Contact. The shout tore across the battlefield. Because they weren't alone. They weren't even early. They were right on time. Behind them, the sky rained destruction. More pods slammed down across the battlefield, some hitting perfectly, others crashing hard, too hard, some never opening, but enough did, more than enough. And each one that opened unleashed another human soldier into the chaos. "They made it," I whispered. Elias didn't answer, because he was already watching the next phase, the one no one else had planned for, the one only humans could survive. The Harvok were still coming. Ava broken, even scattered. They were still deadly. Units that survived the descent smashed into the ground with terrifying force. Limbs unfolding. Weapons activating mid-impact. They didn't need formation anymore. They just needed targets. And now, they had them. The first clash happened less than 30 meters from the trench. A Karvok unit slammed down hard, carving a crater into the earth. Before the dust even settled, a human soldier charged it. No hesitation, no backup, just speed. The alien construct reacted instantly. Blade-like limbs snapping forward, fast enough to cut through armored plating. But the human didn't meet it head-on. They moved around it. Low, fast, precisi. A burst of fire at the joint. A weak point. Something no one had identified before. The limb collapsed. The soldier pivoted. Visor glowing faintly through the smoke. Weapon already raised. No hesitation. No confusion. Just immediate, controlled aggression. Contact. The shout tore across the battlefield. Because they weren't alone. They weren't even early. They were right on time. Behind them, the sky rained destruction. More pods slammed down across the battlefield. Some hitting perfectly. Others crashing hard. Too hard. Some never opening. But enough did. More than enough. And each one that opened unleashed another human soldier into the chaos. "They made it," I whispered. Elias didn't answer, because he was already watching the next phase, the one no one else had planned for, the one only humans could survive. The Harvok were still coming. Even broken, even scattered, they were still deadly. Units that survived the descent smashed into the ground with terrifying force. Limbs unfolding, weapons activating mid-impact. They didn't need formation anymore. They just needed targets. And now, they had them. The first clash happened less than 30 meters from the trench. A Karvok unit slammed down hard, carving a crater into the earth. Before the dust even settled, a human soldier charged it. No hesitation, no backup, just speed. The alien construct reacted instantly, blade-like limbs snapping forward, fast enough to cut through armored plating. But the human didn't meet it head-on. They moved around it. Low, fast, précis, a burst of fire at the joint. A weak point, something no one had identified before. The limb collapsed. The soldier pivoted, fired again. Another joint, another break. Then, a final shot, straight into the core. The Karvok unit dropped. Dead. Not delayed. Not disabled. Destroyed. I felt something shift inside me. They studied them, I realized. Elias nodded slightly. Of course they did. Another impact. Another pod. Another soldier. And this time, they didn't spread out. They grouped. Fast. Efficient. Like they had done this before. Like falling through fire and landing in a war zone. Was just another operation. They're forming strike clusters, I said. Elias's voice stayed calm. Small units. High mobility. They don't hold ground. They take it. The battlefield exploded into motion. Harvok units surged forward. Adaptation kicking in. Targeting new threats. Adjusting attack patterns. But something was wrong. They were too slow. Not physically. Mentally. They were still trying to process the collapse in the sky. Still trying to understand what had just happened to their perfect descent. And the humans were already exploiting it. A squad of 4 moved through a broken ridgeline, using the terrain, using cover, drawing a Karvok unit into a narrow pass. It lunged and triggered a trap. A collapsed debris fragment detonated. Not a massive explosion, but enough. Enough to destabilize. Enough to expose. The squad didn't waste a second. Coordinated fire. Précis. Efficient. The unit fell. Gone. Another squad used the wreckage of fallen pods as cover, baiting enemy units into overextending, forcing them into crossfire angles, breaking them apart, one by one. They're not stronger, I said. No, they're smarter. Elias didn't correct me this time, because now it was obvious. The Karvok adapted, but adaptation required time, data, stability, and Elias had taken all of that away. The battlefield wasn't stable anymore. It wasn't predictable. It wasn't clean. It was chaos, controlled chaos, human chaos, and the swarm was drowning at it. Above us, the sky still raged, fragments still falling, pods still descending, explosions chaining across the upper atmosphere. Every second, more of the enemy was being destroyed before they even reached the ground. This is bigger than the battlefield, I said. This is the invasion itself. Elias nodded. We didn't just fight them. We interrupted them. That word again. Interrupted. Not defeated. Not overpowered. But disrupted so completely that their strength became useless. A massive Karvok construct crashed down near the central ridge, larger than the others, heavier, more armored. It stood, towered, weapons unfolding across its frame. The ground forces hesitated, just for a second, and that's all it needed. It fired. A sweeping arc of energy tore through the battlefield. Explosions erupted. Defensive lines shattered. Even the human squads pulled back. That one's different, I said. Elias leaned forward, analyzing, watching, adapting faster than the enemy ever could. It's a command unit, he said. More processing power. Faster adaptation. And it's stabilizing the others. I realized. Already, nearby Karvik units were reacting faster, moving with more coordination, recovering. If that thing stayed active, the tide could shift back. Fast. Can we target it from orbit? I asked. No, Elias said immediately. Too much interference. Then, a pause. His eyes narrowed slightly. Not in fear, in thought, because something had just clicked. They don't need to destroy it, he said. They just need to isolate it. Before I could ask, he was already on the comm. All units, he said. New priority target. Marking now. The command unit lit up across every display, a beacon in the chaos. Do not engage directly, Elias continued. Collapse terrain around it. Force it into low ground. Cut line of sight. Break its coordination. For a split second, nothing happened. Then the humans moved. Instantly. Like they trusted him. Like they had been waiting for direction exactly like this. Charges placed. Positions shifted. Fire. Redirected. Not at the unit, but at the ground around it. The ridge cracked. Collapsed. Debris. Falling inward. The command unit adjusted. But too late. The terrain gave way beneath it. It dropped into a fractured basin. Visibility gone. Signal interference spiking. Isolation complete. And just like that, the swarm faltered again. They lost their center, I said. Elias watched the screens. Calm, precise. They never had one, he replied. They just thought they did. The human squads closed in. Not reckless. Not rushed. Calculated. Methodical. The command unit fought. Adapted. But now, it was alone. And in human warfare, alone was a death sentence. The final explosion lit the battlefield. Short, sharp, decisive. When the smoke cleared, it was gone. And with it, whatever control the swarm had left. The battlefield fell into a strange, impossible state. Not quiet, never quiet, but shifting, because for the first time, the enemy wasn't advancing. They were breaking. Retreat wasn't in their nature, but collapse was. And we were watching it happen. Live. Real. Unstoppable. I looked back at Elias, at the man who had started all of this, with nothing. No rank. No authority. No recognition. And yet, he had done something no army had ever achieved. He had turned an invasion into its own destruction. You didn't just stop them, I said quietly. Elias didn't look at me. His eyes were still on the sky, on the last fragments of the battle still falling. I changed the rules, he said. Now we transition from chaos to silence. This is where the weight of what just happened truly lands. The sky didn't go quiet all at once. It faded, like a storm losing its strength, like something powerful, finally realizing it had already lost. The burning trails grew fewer, the explosions more distant, the falling debris slowed, and for the first time, in what felt like forever, the ground stopped shaking. No new impacts, no fresh waves, no endless descent, just silence, not complete, not peaceful, but unfamiliar, because moments ago, this had been the end of the world, and now it was something else. I stepped out of the control station slowly. The air still smelled like fire, like metal, like something scorched beyond recognition. The battlefield stretched out in every direction. Broken terrain, cratered earth, fragments of Karvik, constructs scattered like shattered statues, some still smoking, some still twitching, before going still forever. And among them, humans, moving, standing, alive. I couldn't process it at first. My mind kept trying to correct what I was seeing, because this wasn't how it was supposed to end. There were supposed to be none of us left. No survivors. No resistance. No second chance. But instead, there they were. Small groups of human soldiers moving through the wreckage, checking each other, securing the area. finishing off anything that still moved. Efficient, quiet, like the battle had been just another mission, not an impossible stand against extinction. One of them passed near me, armor scarred, helmet cracked along one side, but still walking, still steady. He didn't celebrate, didn't shout, didn't even look surprised. He just nodded once and kept moving, as if surviving the impossible was simply part of the job. Behind me, I heard footsteps, heavy ones, turning. I saw the Qatari war chief approaching, the same one who had nearly shut Elias down, the same one who had expected failure. His armor was damaged, one shoulder plate gone, weapons scorched, but he was standing, alive, and his gaze was fixed on something else entirely. Elias Varn, standing just outside the control station, still, quiet, watching the sky like he was waiting for it to speak again. The war chief stopped a few steps away from him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. No tension, no anger, just silence. Then, slowly, the war chief looked up at the sky, clear now, empty, no falling fire, no descending swarm, nothing. Then back at Elias. "You altered the invasion," he said. "Not a question, a statement." Elias didn't nod, didn't respond, because there was nothing to add. The truth was already written across the battlefield. "You broke their descent," the war chief continued. Another pause. Then, quieter this time, "You broke them." That word again. But now, it wasn't impossible. It was real. I watched Elias carefully, waiting for some kind of reaction. Pride, relief, anything. But he didn't give it, because he wasn't looking at the battlefield anymore. He was looking at the sky. Still, always the sky. "They'll come again," he said quietly. The war chief didn't argue, didn't dismiss it, because after what we had just witnessed, no one was foolish enough to believe this was over. "Yes," the war chief said, "they will." Another silence. "Then, they will not come the same way." Elias finally looked at him, and for the first time, there was something close to recognition between them. Not of rank, not of species, but of understanding. "They can't," Elias said. "Not anymore, because the Karvok swarm had lost something far more important than numbers. They had lost certainty. They had lost the assumption that their method was unbeatable. And in war, that kind of loss spreads faster than destruction." I looked back at the battlefield, at the wreckage of what should have been our extinction, trying to grasp the scale of it. Thousands of enemy units destroyed before impact. Entire waves collapsed mid-descent. Ground forces eliminated before they could stabilize. All because one person, one overlooked, ignored, dismissed individual, had seen something no one else did. "They never expected us to fight the sky," I said. Elias shook his head slightly. "No," he replied. "They expected us to fight them." A faint sound echoed above us. Not an explosion, not an impact, just movement. A few remaining fragments drifting across the upper atmosphere. Harmless now, silent, but different. Because now, we knew what they could become. The battlefield was being secured. Signals sent. Reports compiled. For the first time in this war, there was something worth reporting. Not survival, not delay. Victory. Real. Undeniable. Impossible. And standing at the center of it was the one person no one had even considered part of the fight. I turned back to Elias. "You should report this," I said. "Command needs to know what you did." He didn't move, didn't react. "They'll know," he said. "How?" He finally looked at me, and this time there was the faintest hint of something in his expression. Not pride, not satisfaction, but understanding. "They're still alive," he said. I followed his gaze. Across the battlefield, at the human soldiers moving through the wreckage. Alive. Because of this. Because of him. Because someone had refused to accept that the sky was untouchable. And in that moment, I realized something that would stay with me long after the war ended. Victory hadn't come from strength, or numbers, or even survival. It had come from perspective, from seeing what everyone else ignored, from questioning what everyone else accepted, from refusing to fight the war the way it was supposed to be fought. The sky above us was clear now, empty, but no longer untouchable, because now we knew it could be changed, it could be controlled, it could be turned against anyone who believed it belonged to them, even a force like the Harvok swarm. And as I stood there, watching the last embers of the battle fade into silence, only one thought remained. We had braced for death, and instead, we had learned how to make the impossible fall. The report spread faster than the battle ever did. Across frequencies, across fleets, across worlds that had already begun preparing for their own extinction. At first, no one believed it, because the words didn't make sense. Orbital interference, atmospheric collapse, enemy descent failure. These weren't strategies. They were impossibilities. And yet, every surviving sensor log told the same story. Every battlefield recording confirmed it. The Harvok swarm hadn't been pushed back. They hadn't been slowed. They hadn't even been fought. In the way anyone understood fighting, they had been broken before they could even arrive. Entire waves erased mid-descent, formations collapsing into themselves, units destroyed by their own precision. And in the middle of every report, every transmission, every stunned, disbelieving analysis, one name kept appearing. Not a general, not a war chief, not a decorated commander, a logistics officer, Ilyas Varn. At first, they thought it was an error, a misfiled record, a glitch in the system, because that name didn't belong in a victory report. It belonged in supply logs, inventory sheets, background operations no one ever read. But the more they looked, the clearer it became. Every command override, every orbital adjustment, every timing sequence that led to the collapse traced back to him. A single point of origin, a single decision, a single mind that had seen something no one else could. By the time the High Command finally responded, the story had already spread beyond them. Alien fleets began transmitting requests, not for reinforcements, not for evacuation, but for data. They wanted to understand it, to study it, to replicate it, because for the first time, the Harvok swarm had been made vulnerable, not by strength, but by thought. I was there when the official transmission came through. Priority channel, all command frequency, every surviving unit listening, waiting. The voice that spoke was not emotional, not dramatic, just controlled. But even through that control, you could hear it. Disbelief. Confirmed, the transmission said. Harvok primary descent wave neutralized prior to ground stabilization. A pause, long enough for the weight of those words to settle across every battlefield still listening. Surviving units are to hold position and prepare for secondary engagement protocols. Another pause. Then, Strategic Command requests immediate identification of the officer responsible for orbital interference operations. I looked at Elias, standing exactly where he had been when it all started, near the same broken console, under the same damaged lights, like nothing had changed, like everything hadn't just shifted because of him. You should answer that, I said. He didn't move. They already know, he replied. And he was right, because seconds later, the transmission continued, designation confirmed. Another pause. Then, slower this time, Officer Ilyas Varn. Silence followed. Not static, not interruption, but silence. Across every channel, across every unit, across every survivor who had just heard the name of the man who had done the impossible, I watched the Cathari war chief step forward again. But this time, there was no challenge in his movement, no threat, no doubt. He stopped in front of Elias. And something happened that I had never seen before, something I didn't think his kind was capable of. He lowered his head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement, a warrior's respect. Earned. Undeniable. "You have changed the war," he said. Elias didn't respond immediately, because he wasn't looking at the war chief. He was looking at the horizon, at the distant edge of the battlefield, where smoke still lingered, where the last remnants of the impossible still burned. "I changed one moment," he said quietly. "That's all war ever is." The war chief studied him for a second longer, then nodded once, and stepped back. No more questions, no more doubt, because there was nothing left to question. Around us, more soldiers had stopped. Not just humans, not just Cathari, but others, from species that had never fought beside each other before this war, all looking at the same person, not because of rank, not because of orders, but because they understood something now, something simple, something undeniable. This was the one who had seen what they couldn't, the one who had acted when no one else even thought to try, the one who had turned certain death into something else, something survivable, something winnable. I stepped closer to him. "There are going to be records," I said, "histories. Your name is going to be everywhere." He finally looked at me, and for the first time, there was something almost humanly tired in his expression. "I didn't do it for that," he said. "I know." A faint wind moved across the battlefield, carrying dust, ash, the remnants of what should have been the end, but wasn't. "They'll remember this," I continued. "This moment, this battle." He shook his head slightly. "No," he said. "They'll remember the idea." I frowned. "What idea?" Elias looked up at the sky one last time. Clear, endless, no longer untouchably. "That nothing is untouchable," he said. A pause. Then, not even the sky. Silence followed that. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of everything that had just happened. Everything that had changed. Everything that would never be the same again. Because from this point forward, every enemy that looked down from orbit, every force that believed descent meant victory, every commander who thought the sky belonged to them, would hesitate. Just for a second. Just long enough to wonder, what if it didn't? And sometimes, in Va, a single second of doubt is all it takes. We had braced for death. We had accepted it, prepared for it, counted down to it. But instead, we watched something else fall from the sky. Not destruction, not extinction, but defiance. Human, unlikely, impossible, and unstoppable in its own way. Because while others saw the sky as a boundary, or a barrier, or a domain beyond reach, one overlooked soldier saw something different. A system, a pattern, a weakness. And in doing so, he didn't just win a battle. He didn't just save a planet. He changed how war itself would be fought. Forever. Not destruction, not extinction, but defiance. Human, unlikely, impossible, and unstoppable in its own way. Because while others saw the sky as a boundary, or a barrier, or a domain beyond reach, one overlooked soldier saw something different. A system, a pattern, a weakness. And in doing so, he didn't just win a battle. He didn't just save a planet. He changed how war itself would be fought. Forever.